The historical area between Conegliano and Valdobbiadene in Veneto has been promoted to Prosecco Superiore Conegliano Valdobbiadene in 2019. After over a decade in the making, Conegliano Valdobbiadene is setting itself apart from the wider Prosecco Doc, which is produced in both Veneto and Friuli, whereas Valdobbiadene is a defined small region, less than 9,000 hectares, in Veneto. The Conegliano Valdobbiadene has many unique factors that in this episode we explore with Sarah Abbott, Master of Wine, where we look at with great interest to the hills, which represent the most iconic part of the region. We also talk about new innovations such as Classic Method and the Prosecco Fondo. Sarah goes in great details explaining what is a Prosecco Fondo and what's the difference between that and the pet nut. Lastly, we talk about the ban of the Glyphosate herbicides, which is globally used and the region of Conegliano Valdobbiadene is one of the first to remove it from the protocol. Hi, I'm Mattia Scarpazza, and this is the Looking Into Wine podcast. Wine and winemaking can be complex, but this podcast has a simple mission. We want to give you the skills and tools to harness your passion about wine. Through this series, we will shine a spotlight on some of the different regions, process, and concepts that shape the fascinating world of wine. I hope you enjoy the show and your own journey looking into wine. Welcome to Looking Into Wine. I'm Mattia Scarpazza, and today's guest is a Master of Wine who wrote her dissertation on Barolo. She writes for few publications, including Tea Mackin and the World of Fine Wine. She's also a twice listed finalist for the Roederer Wine Writing Awards. She's a judge for international and specialist wine competition. Her expert among many Australia, Georgia, Lebanon, Alsace, and in Italy is Piedmont, Veneto, and Friuli. And today she's here to talk about Prosecco Superiore Conegliano Valdobbiadene. Welcome to the show, Sarah Abbott.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me.
Pleasure to have you here today. So maybe we can start from the very beginning, because the appellation Prosecco Valdobbiadene Conegliano is fairly recent. When was the start?
The birth of Conegliano Valdobbiadene Prosecco Superiore was 2009, but actually it was first created by a group of producers in 1969. Actually, it was created then as a DOC, and it was one of the earliest DOCs in Italy. And like a lot of those early DOCs, these regulatory bodies, they actually grew kind of organically out of a group of like-minded producers that started off as quite small groups. And the producers come together because they have shared high standards on quality, production methods, and the desired kind of style and typicity. So it was created, first of all, in 1969 as Prosecco di Conegliano e Valdobbiadene. And then in 2009, what happened was that you created the Prosecco Superiore DOCG for Conegliano Valdobbiadene as distinct from what then became a more enlarged Prosecco DOC denomination.
The thing about the Conegliano Valdobbiadene is a small restricted area of I can't remember how many hectares are there, but it's also quite competitive. There is not many vineyards left in the whole region.
Yeah, it's an astonishing place to visit because every little corner that could be planted with a vineyard on these really steep slopes has, with the exception of the woods and the forests. So it's really beautiful because it's so rural and it's so woody. So all the local forests, and some of these forests are very old, they are still in place. And you even see all the houses and the farm buildings are surrounded by the vineyards. So it's one of the most historic wine areas of Italy.
It's much of a contrast to the Prosecco, the plains of the Prosecco, the hillside of the Conegliano is what makes the region famous.
Yes.
How does those hill gives the influence to the wines that are produced?
Well, the hilly terrain of Conegliano and Valdobbiadene really defines its style and its personality. So you are in between really the Dolomites and the sea. The landscape of the Veneto is really quite particular in that part of it is really low. You go down to the lagoon of Venice, and the Po Valley is a very flat valley of high fertility and high soil fertility and also high humidity. But then you are climbing up to these incredibly hilly it feels like almost a subalpine kind of climate. You've got the Dolomites and the Prealps where people go skiing in the Dolomites. So the hills are absolutely key to Prosecco Superiore and Conegliano and Valdobbiadene. So first of all, the hills create this constant air circulation, and when you go and walk around the vineyards, the breeze is always there. There's always wind. It's always like playing with your hair, and you can feel it on your face. The other thing about the hills, as well as creating this kind of current of air, cool air that comes from the mountains. The other thing about the hills is that they're orientated from east to west. So they run really from the outskirts of Venice and Treviso all the way across to the east. And this means that the vineyards are all orientated south. So this is actually a relatively cool, quite wet, potentially could be quite a wet microclimate, but yet the vineyards are kind of basically sunbathing. So you've had these south-facing slopes, very good exposure to sunshine, and with altitude as well. So the altitude is key. It runs between 100 to 500 meters, and that gives you very high diurnal differentiation. So in the summer, hot sunny days, you will feel the sun if you try and walk up the hills in Valdobbiadene in the summer, but then the nights are cool. And this kind of pulse ripening we know is key for developing grapes with the composition of good acidity and good precursors for aromatic flavours. But, Italians love hills. Bacchus loves hills. All the great historic, most traditional wine regions of Italy and the Veneto, Soave, Valpolicella. It's all about the hills.
Yeah, it's all about the hills in Italy.
Yeah, it really is. That's and then what you tend to find across Italy is that in some regions they call the hilly regions like the Classico zone, for example, Chianti Classico. In Prosecco Superiore, the original historic hillside zone is actually called Superiore. It's not called Prosecco Classico. It's called Prosecco Superiore.
Okay, that was so in terms of labeling, that's how you define on the label you will see Superiore, Prosecco Superiore.
Yes.
What terms they can use on the labels? Because I know that I was reading through them and I was trying to defining them.
Yes, I think Italian labels, they set out to actually be very thorough and helpful. And I think for anyone who's trying to get to grips with Italian wines, I'd just say embrace the nuance, because actually you will get there in the end. So the official denomination name is Conegliano Valdobbiadene DOCG Prosecco Superiore, or they can call it just Prosecco Superiore DOCG. But what you see on the label is, first of all, the most important part, and it's usually in the biggest, most prominent font, is the name of the zone. So Conegliano Valdobbiadene. And for most, I think, actually, I have never seen a wine from this region where the writing Conegliano Valdobbiadene is not the most prominent writing on the bottle. So usually that writing is more prominent than the term Prosecco. So to the producers, their identity is predominantly the identity of Conegliano Valdobbiadene. And then you will then see Prosecco Superiore on the label. Usually, I should just say that some producers, especially small producers, of which actually there are many in this area, if they are exclusively in Valdobbiadene, they may label their wine as Valdobbiadene, DOCG. So they are allowed to choose either Conegliano and Valdobbiadene, the two words, or they can say just Conegliano if they're in Conegliano, or they can just say Valdobbiadene if they're in Valdobbiadene. Yeah,
the nuance of it.
Yes,
the nuance
welcome
of Italian
to Italy.
labeling.
Yeah.
So we are saying if we are closer to Valdobbiadene, the producer can label it as just Valdobbiadene Prosecco Superiore, and likewise for Conegliano, or they can have both.
It's quite unusual, though, just to have the one town or the other. Most of the wines that you will see say Conegliano Valdobbiadene, and Conegliano is the town in the east, and is the town. Conegliano is a slightly bigger town where you have really lots of cultural interest, amazing old buildings, some noted frescoes, and it's a slightly bigger, it's a bigger sort of, not exactly, I mean, it's nothing like a city, but it's like a nice little regional town. Valdobbiadene is over in the west, and it's very pretty. It's tiny, like more of a village, actually.
Wow. And you were saying earlier that there's many smaller producers producing in the area, which is quite different to what you see in the Prosecco area, which is more larger producer.
It's true. I think that it's around 3,000 individual producers or growers. It's 3,000 sort of individual operators. And many of those operators have been handed their land, or inherited, been handed on their land through their family for generations. So in many ways, this is a very traditionally agricultural part of the province of Treviso. I should just say on the labelling, I hadn't quite...
absolutely.
So first of all, you would tend to see Conegliano Valdobbiadene with underneath it, or above it in smaller letters, Prosecco Superiore. Now, the term superiore is used for fully sparkling spumante Prosecco. It is possible to find in the region still a wine, which is absolutely delicious. So they call it tranquillo, and it's made from the same grape variety, but it's not sparkling. But if you have a still wine, it can be called Conegliano Valdobbiadene Prosecco DOCG, but not Superiore. So it can only be called Superiore if it's a spumante, fully sparkling. Okay. And then there are two other categories of terms that you will see on the label. And one of those is the style of the wine, which means how dry it is, how much residual sugar is left in the wine. And these are terms that are common to all sparkling wines, these categories, and they are extra brut, which is the most dry, and then brut, extra dry, and dry. And dry is actually the sweetest. Sorry. This sounds so confusing, but you've got 4 different styles: extra brut, extra dry, dry, and extra brut is the driest, least sweet, and dry is the sweetest. And then there's one more term. Okay, sorry, stick with me.
Okay,
stick with
absolutely.
Benvenuto in Italia. There's another term which you may or may not see, which designates the single vineyard or the subzone where the grapes were grown. And this will be preceded by the word rive. And rive, and it will say rive de, or de, and then give a name of a particular a site. So, for example, you might see rive de Oliano. So Oliano is a historic, traditional, designated single vineyard area near Conegliano. So not all Prosecco Superiore are single site rive, but where they are, they will say rive and then the name of the rive. And those typically designate more premium bottling. And I think there's some really exciting rive wines being made in the area. And then finally, you might see the vintage. You should see the vintage as well, the year of the harvest as well. Sorry.
it was something I was going. No, absolutely, it was something I was going to ask about the river because I know they are an important category and an important. They are unique to the region, so I think they're very important to understand why. And we've gone through them, and then so. Would you say then the river represent, because there is this quest to represent the terroir in this region, they say this region can represent it. Would you say the river, the one that can represent the best of the terroir, or where they're from?
Yes, the thing about Rive is that they kind of formalise a long tradition that's naturally part of the area, and that tradition is to name particular sites. And Rive is a dialect word meaning the steep slope. And these names, there are 43 of them, okay? But these names, they are all long-standing names. They've been used by the locals, designate, that hill there, that particular slope there for generations. And some of them are small enough for you basically to stand on the opposite hill and see the whole thing. And some of them might take in, a couple of hectares. But they are generally, in fact, I'd say they are always a sign that the winemaker has wanted to capture a very specific identity. So the kind of convention well established in wine for a single vineyard bottling to really be the expression of the winemaker's kind of ambition and deep connection with a place also applies to Prosecco Superiore. So Rive, I'd say, are pretty much always the more premium bottling. They usually have they're a limited production, and they absolutely do give a great way of exploring the terroir. And when we've done tastings where we've shown 8 different Rive wines and we've taken people on like a virtual tour from, east to west through the Rive, people absolutely love it.
Absolutely. And if you were to put just to give an idea to the listeners, how many in percentage, would they represent the 1, 5, 20%?
Oh, it's tiny. So there are about 8,500 hectares in the whole Conegliano Valdobbiadene area, in the zone, in the DOC. Call it 8,500, 8,500 hectares. And about 250 of those hectares are Rive. So it's a really tiny percentage. I'm trying to work out what percentage 250 divided by.
We let the listeners do the math, but it's definitely a small percentage of the whole production. And before I go to ask you a couple of the recent things have happened on the region, which are very interesting, I wanted to ask about Cartizze.
Yes. Okay.
Where does the sit and what is so special about Cartizze? Because it's also probably one of the most premium example of Prosecco. You can go for quite premium price.
Yeah, so Cartizze is the most historic, is an area of just over 100 hectares. I think some of the first written records to the vineyards of Cartizze actually date back to the 1700s. So Cartizze was written down, actually, I think even before Prosecco was written down. So Cartizze is the, it's like the mother lode, it's like the original source, really, for wines from this area. And what is special about Cartizze is that it's incredibly steep. It's in the commune of Valdobbiadene, which is in the west of the region. And when you go to Cartizze, you will see that it's like a kind of amphitheatre. It's incredibly steep, and it has this lovely kind of south exposure with these curving hills. And it has some really old vines there. The soil there is quite particular in that actually the origin is of marine origin. So the soil in Cartizze was created by the rising up of the seabed. So you've got lots of moraines, sandstones, clays. It's quite particular. And so you get very rapid drainage after rain, but at the same time, very good effective water holding capacity. And we know that soils that have the ability to provide this to the vine meet this sweet point in defining quality, which is that at the time of veraison, of ripening the grapes, when you're in the summer and you've got a little bit of water stress, the vine is just worried enough about surviving that it decides, I need to ripen my babies. And the babies, of course, are the grapes. And this kind of light water stress, but with soils that have got just enough capacity, water holding capacity, to still keep the vine vegetatively healthy, that's a key point in high quality of all the special sites all around the world. And the other thing about Cartizze is that, again, it has this constant breeze. And it has a really high diurnal difference. It's kind of like the quintessence of all the most perfect elements of the terroir of the whole of the region. And the wines are always very aromatic. They can actually reach quite as almost sort of ripe aromatics. And traditionally, actually, Cartizze was usually made towards the sweeter end of the styles, so it was always made dry. But I should say I've seen more and more producers actually making Cartizze in a slightly less sweet style.
Absolutely. I mean, it's something, Cartizze is something, being in Italy, we used to have Cartizze on special occasions, and there was something we recognized. And that, your point you were making about dry style, that led me quite nicely to my next question, which is, I was reading and I know that there is a couple of things that are happening in the region going towards drier style, but also some classic method, not only tank and pet nut. What is all this about?
There's a lot of artisanal innovation in Conegliano Valdobbiadene. The huge majority of production is made method Martinotti. So this is where you make your base wine, your still wine, and then your second fermentation is in pressurized tanks where the wine is basically charged with yeast and enough sugar so that by the time it's the end of fermentation, you'll have your desired residual sugar. And then it undergoes fermentation, the second fermentation in tank, and that is then bottled under pressure. I should just say, though, there's a lot of variation in the way different producers, for example, handle the fermentation of the base wine. So some producers might decide they want to, have a little bit of extended aging on lees of the base. The temperature of the second fermentation, the duration of the second fermentation, they all vary greatly. But in essence, that first thing I've just described, that's the Martinotti method. It's also called the Charmat method, and that's 98% of production, possibly 99% of production. You then have other styles. So you have Metodo Classico, so you have producers making bottle fermented, just as you would find, for example, in champagne. And typically these are made usually from single sites, and they are made in a way which has a little bit more aging on the lees, and usually made in a drier style. I actually really like them a lot. And then there's two other niche styles. So one of the styles we've already talked about, and these are the still wines, the Tranquillo. I've never actually seen them exported. I've only had them when I've come to the region, but they're delicious.
I did my research and I studied. I never came across them, so I'll have to look for them when I go back to Italy.
Oh, I mean, they're lovely, and they have a lovely kind of stony scented delicacy. They're nice wines. But of course, I mean, can you imagine? It's going to be so hard to sell, Prosecco Superiore and it's Prosecco and it's still, but they're interesting wines and they're nice. And then the other style is we call sui lieviti, which is sometimes also called col fondo. So sui lieviti means with its yeasts and col fondo means sort of with the sediment. And this is another bottle fermented style. It's actually a style which recalls the first origins of... In this method, you make your base wine and you bottle. So you don't put it into tank, you bottle your base wine. You then add some yeast and sugar, so a kind of dosage. You then cork the bottle, not crown cap. If you want to call it Conegliano Valdobbiadene, you must use cork. They cork the bottle. Fermentation, second fermentation takes place in the bottle. So the wine is sparkling and that's it. It's not disgorged. So the wine retains the sediment from the second fermentation within the bottle. And technically speaking, it's not a pet nat because a pet nat uses the naturally occurring residual sugar and yeast from fermentation to stimulate the second fermentation. This method actually does include a dosage and they're lovely. They are lightly cloudy. Typically they can be served shaken or sort of decanted into these long jugs.
And Sarah, I just got the last question, and then I wanted to speak a bit about what you do here. But the region has taken a quite a big step on removing last year the
Glyphosate. Yes.
Glyphosate. That's it. Very good movement. How? Why?
Yes. So when you asked me. You told me you were going to ask me this question, so I actually got in touch with the Consorzio because I wanted to get the history behind this move because I know that they were working on it for years. I think it took like a decade. Yes. So they launched this initiative to ban glyphosate. They started working on it back in 2010. And just to recap, so glyphosate is probably the most widely used herbicide all over the world, and it's used in agriculture, all agricultural crops. And I think it is used globally. I can't think of a country that doesn't use it. And it is controversial. So some studies have found that have classified it as a probable carcinogen. I should say that the makers of glyphosate don't accept that, but it is fair to say that there is a lively conversation where concern has been expressed about glyphosate. And the consideration for Conegliano Valdobbiadene is that the vineyards are right up against the villages. So when you are treating your vineyards, you know that you're going to get a spread and you are going to be spreading into your villages, into your community. It's not a place where you have a big stretch where the vineyards are and then in another area of the, the region you've got where people live. It's houses, vineyards, really close. So the Consorzio started looking, and the Consorzio is comprised of its members. So every decision that the Consorzio makes is taken by elected committees that the members choose. And so they set out to ban glyphosate after a lot of research and consideration. And actually, in order to make it happen, they had to work with not just the Consorzio, but also with all the other quasi-governmental and, regulatory bodies in the area. And they decided to ban it together with the local administrations because they realised they had the commitment and they had the they had the will, they had the collective will of the community to make it happen. So the final ban was implemented in 2019, but they also did a lot of work into a viticultural protocol, because it's one thing to ban glyphosate, but then if you don't look at what people start using instead, what's the point? Because there are lots of herbicides out there. So they also, at the same time that they looked at glyphosate, they undertook this big research, this viticultural protocol, which was, again, a hugely, it had to be collaborative. They did consultation with the growers and the community. And so they also banned other formulations that contained things like folpet and mancozeb. This I'm reading from my notes from dithianon based. So they have this, it's like an integrated sustainable viticulture protocol. And the great achievement is that the take-up has been so high. And I think this is really a significant achievement to get this level of collective adoption of this kind of sustainable viticulture in a region, that is, the Veneto can be quite humid. I mean, there, the terroir is good. You've got breezes. It's got a good vocation for viticulture, but it's still a significant commitment. But I think that it's been a really forward-thinking, environmentally aware.
There's a green movement towards a green area. Sarah, I think that answered all my questions in great details, as I expected it would have been. I just wanted to say that you also have a company here in the UK called Swirl.
Yes, my company's called Swirl Wine Group. Yeah.
And you have also events you do events and represent the...
Yes, I do. So, yeah. So I set my company up. The first version of my company I actually set up 20 years ago. And actually, no, not 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And then what I do is I work, with Prosecco Superiore, Conegliano Valdobbiadene, and I promote and help them to develop their market in the UK, predominantly to the wine business. So we do a lot of B2B communication. So we hold events and tastings and education for sommeliers, wine buyers, the wine media, because actually Prosecco Superiore and Conegliano Valdobbiadene is still really underestimated. It's getting better, but when we first started talking to people about these wines, there wasn't a real understanding of how they were different. And I think that, Italy is gloriously kind of individualistic, but I think that, and I'm very grateful to the Consorzio for giving us the time over these 3 years to really work on quite a detailed education program and on a program of events that is really quite, geeky. And they've made available to us, their top technical advisors. And that has really been important because it's the detail that is really important.
Yeah, I invite everybody. I mean, I know there are quite a few sommeliers and other people in the industry in the UK, in the wine industry. So I invite everybody to have a look on the Sarah website, which is Swirl Wine Communication, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, it's Swirl Wine Group.
Swirl Wine.
Yes.
Swirl
Thank
Wine
you.
Group. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, Sarah, thank you so much for this time this evening. It was much appreciate it. I really enjoyed it, and I learned a few things new for myself. And thank you again.
My pleasure. Well, we hope to be able to see you in Prosecco Superiore on the Prosecco Hills in person later this year. That would be nice.
It'd be a pleasure. Yeah, it would be nice.
Thank you. Bye for now. Bye.
That was Sarah Abbott, Master of Wine, talking about Conegliano Valdobbiadene, that uses name Prosecco to make wines of terroir. and interest. If you're new to the podcast, remember to hit the subscribe button and tell your friends about it. Also, be sure to go to Mattia Scarpazza and to subscribe to the mailing list. It's the only way you can listen to the Prestige, the after-interview conversation with the guest. You can find Looking Into Wines on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and every major listening app. If you'd like to support the growth of the podcast, you can donate on mattiascarpazza.com. Thank you again to my guest today, Sara Abbott. Music produced by Samuele Di Nardo, editing and mastering by Tommaso Ascoli.
15 minutes could save you 15% or more.
Oh, that's a cheer we used to do in softball.
What? It's actually Geico's.
Whenever someone hit a triple, we would wave our bats and yell, 15 minutes could save you 15% or more. But we never got to use it because we would only hit home runs. Annoying.
The phrase is from Geico because they help save people money.
Geico? Yeah, they were our team sponsor.
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more.
Sweating in bed keeping you up at night? Whoa, get your mind out of the gutter. This isn't that kind of commercial. You need the cooling power of Purple, the mattress that is. It's comfort reinvented thanks to the Purple Grid. It allows air to flow through, so you sleep cool and comfortable all night long. And it flexes and cushions no matter what position you sleep in. Maybe it is that kind of commercial. Anyway, save up to $400 on select Purple mattresses and bedding bundles. Get yours at purple.com/sleepin. Terms apply.